the most important lessons that I have to teach people these days is the difference between their ego and their soul. I think a lot of people are confused or maybe not even aware that we are of two minds, at least. Most people understand what the ego is and maybe even what it's here to do. But I think that it's important to make that clear that the ego is all about the physical body, keeping it safe in physical reality. And all of the way in which that it develops structures and ideas of the world such that it can keep you safe. And so the actual functioning is not necessarily the problem with ego. Often what the problem is with ego is the way that it was originally set up in childhood. And so what you thought were these dangers in childhood are not dangers anymore in adult, but this is all adulthood, but this is all unconscious functioning. And so unless you sort of dig up the software of all of this and change it, debug it, you're still running a child ego. So really understanding the difference between when you're in ego and when you're in soul is really super important. As I said earlier, when you're in ego, you're often in a place of fear. But there's also some other indications that you're in an ego trap of your own sort of psychological childhood making. And that is often in your body, you're going to feel constricted, shut down, limited, restricted, tight. You're also going to feel in your emotional body a lot of emotion. You're going to be driven by a lot of that emotion. And in your mental body, there's going to be scripts of thoughts and feelings and various patterns of thinking that's going to be pretty quick and very righteous. You have this righteous feeling, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. And spiritually, you're not going to be connected at all to your higher self. And so if you have any opportunity in that, and oftentimes that's done unconsciously, and so only a little bit later we'd be able to go back and go, wow, for the last 10 minutes I was in a complex, I was in an ego trap. But hopefully some part of your witnessing self comes into the picture and you're like, oh wow, I'm in ego, let me shut down, let me stop, let me sort of spend some time to get out of it in some way, weasel out of it so that you can get back into your higher self, your soul self. And when you're in your soul self, you're feeling open, you're feeling in flow, you're feeling neutral emotionally, you're feeling connected to others, you're feeling light, happy, peaceful, and just really open. And the difference is pretty dramatic when you notice the difference. And it's the latter place, the soul place, where you want to make a lot of your decisions and also where you want to relate with others. When you're in your ego self, in an ego trap, you're in your own story. There might be other people out there, but you're just projecting your own sort of script onto them. They're a screen for the projections of what's going on in your own psyche, your own sort of neurotic, distorted reality psyche that ego has constructed from your childhood. And so what you're trying to do is sort of lift up out of that. And when you lift up out of that or get out of that in some way with your conscious intention to be in your soul self, then you can look back at the ego complex, the ego trap, and start to make changes with it. Realize that it is distorted reality in some way and start to not believe it. And really start to believe in this other sort of higher dimensional self that you are. A lot of times relationships are caught in ego trap to ego trap, and they just have these fights back and forth. And they're competing with each other for objective reality, which is coming from their distorted subjective reality. And then they fight. They just fight. And they fight like that for years because they don't know better. They don't know necessarily that they're trapped in their ego story. They believe that to be very true, that constructed reality from their childhood ego. and they can't understand why their spouse is not supporting that reality. And so there's a constant fight there. And so part of what I try to help people do is get out of their ego traps and understand it individually, but then to learn to relate in a place from that soul, from that love. Because when they're in their ego traps, they're pretty much in one of the negative emotions of guilt, shame, fear, that kind of thing. And we think that we're loving when we're from that place, when we sort of grab for our partner, our lover, or whatever in that way. But we're not. We're not. We really need to relate to each other from a place of love. And when we're in that place of fear, go off by ourselves and kind of clear that and fix that internally, as I had mentioned earlier. And so in relationships, most of what I see these days is a lot of codependent relationships. And I think it's important to kind of talk about that a little bit, because we are relating to each other from the place of our lack, our ego trapped lack, that it was set up in childhood by various attachment disorders. They set up where we've been abandoned by our parents or engulfed by our parents. We have those two choices. And, well, there's a third one that I don't see very often, and that's the healthy attachments. But most of us, in some ways, have had, overbearing parents or absent parents. And in so doing, it sets up this ego structure around that original wound of attachment or detachment. And from there, we learn everything about our relationships, and we drag that into our current relationship. So we're coming from a place of fear of abandonment or fear of engulfment, and we get in relationships, and the person has fear of abandonment and the person has fear of engulfment, get together and make a pair, a codependent pair. And so what I try to do is help people understand their side of the equation and get out of it. And so part of it is going back to understanding the belief that is driving all of your behavior. If it's coming from fear, that's not love. And most of people I see in relationships are coming from a place of fear. They're having ego relationships. And nowadays, most people are interested in something deeper. They really do want a soulful relationship. And if they do, then you actually have to be in soul, to be in love, not in fear, not in ego, not in an ego trap. So if you're a person who feels like your needs are never going to be met in relationship, and you're in relationship, and that's your deep unconscious belief that your needs are never met, and that usually is a person who has the fear of abandonment, then that unconscious belief is manifesting your reality. And every relationship around you is going to, in some way, set up you not getting your needs met. Regardless of whether your needs are being met or not, because you're not seeing that, you're not looking for that. That unconscious belief is not only manifesting your reality, but it's also setting up your ego to only look for what's missing. On the other hand, you might be someone who believes that you're always going to be in a relationship that fails, or you're always not good enough in relationship. And again, if that's your belief, and deep in your unconscious, then again, that is manifesting your reality. That is attracting, to use the law of attraction, that is attracting and manifesting everything in your reality. And therefore, again, the ego is what? It's looking for ways to prove that belief true. And therefore, your mind's not even looking for or collecting data on the opposite. And so in a lot of ways, what I try to do is I help people, one, understand the deep belief that is driving their relational life, and then two, work on the opposite. Work on looking for what's there instead of what's not there. And again, if you start doing that, you're counteracting ego in a lot of ways, and certainly starting to overcome and change this neurotic program.